Richard Wright, 1908 to 1960, one of the early forceful and eloquent spokesmen for Black Americans, author of Native Son and Black Boy, was also, it turns out, a major poet. During the last 18 months of his life, he discovered and became enamored of haiku, the strict 17-syllable Japanese form. Wright became so excited about the discovery that he began writing his own haiku, in which he attempted to capture, through his sensibility as an African American, the same Zen discipline and beauty in depicting man's relationship. Not to his fellow man, as he had in his fiction, but to nature and the natural world. In all, he wrote over 4,000 haiku, from which he chose, before he died, the 817 he preferred. Rather than a deviation from his self-appointed role as spokesman for Black Americans of his time, Richard Wright's haiku, disciplined and steeped in beauty, are a culmination. Not only do they give added scope to his work, but they bring to it a universality that transcends both race and color without ever denying them. And now, here's your Japan Journal host, Malcolm W. Adams, with tonight's special report on a Black poet's perspective on Japanese haiku.
Respect family, Brother Malcolm here. I'm reporting to you from the Media Arts Lab in beautiful downtown Kakegawa City, Shizuoka Prefecture, Japan. And you're listening to Japan Journal, the internet's #1 English language weekly online cybercast from Japan, the land of the ever-rising sun, where we disseminate high-level vibrations through far-reaching conversations, because that is your designation for permanent elevation on GNN, the Global News Network. So tap into us, won't you? Why don't you? You'll be glad you did. Thank you. Tonight on Japan Journal, we have a program of haiku, Japanese rhyme and verse, 575 verse patterns. But we're brought to you tonight by Lagrima Real, a beautiful red wine that I discovered here, popular in Japan, from the nation of España. That's right, Spain. Vino Tinto, red wine from Spain, baby. And so before we get started, got an interesting show for you tonight, but I'm going to try to stop slurring my words and enunciate clearly as I wet my whistle. Kaori. It smells good, tastes good. The natural essence, baby, of red wine. So, Richard Wright, famous Black poet from New York, Brooklyn, I believe, maybe Harlem, wrote mainly 575 haiku. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 5 is the pattern of haiku. Anything deviating from that, it ain't the real thing. So I write haiku, been writing for years, but I write it in English, of course. But Richard Wright, wrote mainly 575 haiku, deviating only a bit at times. And I want you listeners to understand that I have neither a preference for this style nor prejudice against it. I do love 575 haiku. There is but one haiku. However, that being said, it is true that Wright, like most others, have chosen to follow this discipline. Could have obviously written better versions of some of his haiku if he had not been so rigid on this point. But that in having been said is an oxymoron, because the fact of the matter is that haiku is rigid in adherence to 575, right? Okay. So it's got to be 17 syllables. All right, that's the key. But in Wright's haiku, he knows exactly where to go and how to get there, so let's go. Here's some examples. Now remember who he was, an African-American activist, civil rights advocate. In his writings, The Native Son and Black Boy and all of these things spoke to the crisis of the problem of Jim Crow. Yeah. So this one I'd like to share with you. 575. Heaps of black cherries, glittering with drops of rain in the evening sun. 575, baby. Heaps of black cherries glittering with drops of rain in the evening sun. So it's got to have something pertaining to nature, something pertaining to the natural essence of things, weather, the wind, meteorological things that, man can't create for themselves. These are acts and conditions of nature, environment. That's got to be in it, usually in the second verse. And I think that Wright admired Busan and Shiki, two Japanese haiku poets. Most of Wright's haiku contains strong visual images, often very colorful, and the use of words black, white, or other words like molasses and snowflakes are prominent in many of his haiku because that's who he was. Black Renaissance poet, of all things. So more examples of his use of color. Check this out. An old winter oak, once upon a time there was a big black ogre. Or this one. Creamy plum blossoms, once upon a time there was a pretty princess. So Busan and Issa and other Japanese masters occasionally referred to Japanese fairy tales in their haiku, but Wright, in the two haiku above, has a tale of his own to tell. For example, the green cockleburs caught in the thick woolly hair of the black boy. Or this one. An Indian summer heaps itself in tons of gold over Nigger Town. Okay, another one. As the sun goes down, the green melon splits open and juice trickles out. Humor is often lacking in Wright's haiku, but not in this particular one here. Coming from the woods, a bull has a lilac sprig dangling from a horn. Occasionally, Wright's haiku take place in an urban rather than a rural environment, as most Japanese haiku do, because he's a New York guy for all practical purposes. He writes accordingly. For example, from this skyscraper, all the bustling streets converge towards the spring sea. And compare the next haiku with the one that follows by Taigi. Wright wrote, a freezing morning, I left a bit of my skin on the broomstick. Okay, but Taigi wrote, similarly, and interestingly enough, bamboo broom, too cold to hold, left under the pine. Wright very occasionally uses a technique that I call a haiku round. Simply explained, in haiku rounds, the reader goes from the third line back to the first line again, going around in an unending circle, repeating the haiku as often as one wishes. Some of the Japanese haiku masters also wrote haiku rounds, and it's a technique that should probably be explored more often, more than has been in English so far by English-speaking haiku poets. Rhythm and rhyme are often employed when using this technique. For example, the neighing horses are causing echoing neighs in neighboring barns. Here's an example of a haiku round by Taigi. The mountain roses, green, yellow, and green. Another at Busan. Rising and falling all day, the spring sea, rising and falling. Wright occasionally deals with socio-economic issues in his haiku. Naturally, that's who he was. And he wrote, for example, the Christmas season, a whore is painting her lips larger than they are. And then remember Baisho's Traveler, those of you who know haiku, he wrote, first winter shower, you can just call me a traveler now. Wright's circumstances were quite different, however. He wrote, "Their watching faces as I walk the autumn road make me a traveler." Here's a good haiku on an ecological thing. With the forest trees cut, the lake lies naked and lost in the bare hills. Compare the next haiku with the one by Alexis Rotella that follows. In a dank basement, a rotting sack of barley swells with sprouting grain. Followed by, a bag of barley bursts onto the floor. Winter moon. That ain't quite 575 pattern, but here's another one. Standing in the snow, a horse shifts his heavy haunch slowly to the right. Okay. Now compare that one with Timothy Russell's 1999 Shiki Slam Grand Prize winner, Noon. The egret shifts from stillness to stillness. A little bit weird, a little bit different. Don't really qualify. Just got a couple of here more. That frozen star there, or this one on the water, which is more distant? And then here's one with a double question. Why did this spring wood grow so silent when I came? What was happening? All right, folks, that's going to do it. Listen, I'm going to leave you with that. That's Brother Mal's Japan Journal for this week. A little trip down memory lane of haiku. I will share some of my original ones to you as time goes on and this becomes a series that may gain traction. You dig? So I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you viewing. I feel compelled to go back and reiterate my original opening for this series, which went a little bit something like this, as I introduce and let you know what this is really all about. Let me just reiterate, for those of you who may just have joined, you can always play this back on my Facebook page or my YouTube channel. I greet you thusly. Respect, family. Brother Malcolm here. I'm reporting to you from the Media Arts Lab in beautiful downtown Kakeao City, Shizuoka Prefecture, Japan. And you're listening to Japan Journal, the internet's #1 English language weekly online cybercast from Japan, the land of the ever-rising sun, where we disseminate high-level vibrations through far-reaching conversations, because that is your designation for permanent elevation on GNN, the Global News Network. Tap into us, won't you? Why don't you? You'll be glad you did. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And good day.